Okay, welcome to the ESA Junior Faculty Webinar Series today. Thank you for joining us. As always, we'll have two 20-minute presentations, and these will be followed by 5-minute discussions and 5 minutes for questions. As most of you already know, we have an after party at the end. We normally use this extra time to ask more questions to the speakers as well as discussants and have a more in-depth conversation about the papers. Sometimes these conversations lead to discussions to topics beyond these papers, and I personally find these discussions quite interesting and even sometimes helpful. Our first speaker today is Valeria Berdia. She got her PhD in economics from the University of Nottingham in 2018. Currently, she's doing her postdoc at the University of Pittsburgh, and she'll be joining Ludwig Maxmilian University as an assistant professor this fall. So congratulations for your new job. Her primary research focus is the strategic transmission and reception of information. She's also interested in belief updating and dishonesty. Today, she'll be presenting us her study, When Does Communication Harm? Valeria, take it away.
Thank you for the kind introduction and for organizing the seminar series. Yeah, do you want to stop screen sharing? I'm not sure if I can, or maybe, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna try to share my screen now.
It should be good now.
Yeah. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you also to the attendants for attending this talk. So as Bilur already said, the title of my presentation is When Does Communication Harm? To begin with, consider the following examples. A seller wants to sell their product irrespective of its quality. A politician always wants to get elected. These are situations where a sender, in this case, a seller or a politician, can communicate with their respective counterparts, the buyer or the voter, in order to persuade them to take the action that is in their interest, to buy the product or vote for them. And often in these situations, we take the existence of communication for granted. But what would happen if communication did not take place, if the buyers or sellers were not allowed to transmit potentially cheap talk information to the recipients? Would the buyers or voters make better or worse decisions? So in this paper, I ask, does communication help or harm in these situations, and what might lead to one direction rather than the other? Standard theoretical predictions suggest that cheap talk cannot harm because players always have the option to either babble on the side of the senders, that is to transmit non-informative communications, or on the side of the recipients to ignore this communication. However, there is evidence that people become more skeptical than they should in different communication situations. And George Carlin captured the intuition behind this point in a very well written remark. Tell people the paint is wet and they'll have to touch it to be sure. There is also evidence suggesting that consumers forego good offers after advertising communications. And this may lead them to lower payoffs. So if communication cannot be ignored, then a better understanding of its effects on people's decisions is necessary in order to design communication protocols that can enhance the positive effects on the one hand and minimize the negative ones. Communication has been extensively researched in many situations like ultimatum games, dictator games, trust games, coordination games, And in most scenarios, it has been shown to improve outcomes or at the very least not harm players. However, in standard cheap talk games, the effect is unclear. So on the one hand, there is evidence from Kai and Wang 2006 that senders tell the truth more often than standard theory predicts. This can represent a positive effect. However, the interest of this paper was not the effect of communication, so they didn't test for the effect of communication. On the other hand, receivers, in Ert et al. In 2014 found that receivers tend to be more skeptical with cheap talk than without. So in this paper, they did test for the effect of communication, and they found that receivers rejected optimal offers more often with communication than without, which would suggest that communication can have a negative effect. They didn't look at the payoff effects in this paper, though. So in my study, I focus on these two potential mechanisms for positive and negative effects of cheap talk. That is lying aversion, the possibility of senders disliking being untruthful, which can result in truth-telling and therefore have a positive effect, at least for the recipients. And on the other hand, sucker aversion, receivers disliking being taken advantage of and rewarding a potentially deceitful sender. This can result in excessive skepticism, like in the case of Ert et al., which can have a negative effect. And I study their balance as a function of the relative conflict of interest between the sender and the receiver. The theoretical framework that I use to understand the dynamics is a simple one. So the game is composed of two players, a sender and a receiver. There are two states, the red state and the blue state, and the timing is the following. In the first stage, the nature draws the state, which is red with probability P. The sender then observes the state privately and sends a message to the receiver that can be either the state is red or the state is blue. Lastly, the receiver observes the message and takes the action A, which is either red or blue. Payoffs are such that the sender would like the receiver to always choose the red state, so they get a positive payoff if the receiver chooses red, and they get 0 otherwise, whereas the receiver wants to always guess correctly. So they want to choose red when the state is red and blue when the state is blue. The solution concept is perfect Bayesian equilibrium, and it is useful to differentiate between 3 types of equilibria. That is uninformative equilibria, where these are babbling equilibria, where receivers' beliefs do not change. There's not enough information for in the message to change receivers' beliefs from their priors regarding the distribution of the states, and therefore their action doesn't change compared to their ex-ante optimal action. There are also informative equilibria that change receivers' beliefs, but not enough to lead to change in their behavior. And there are persuasive equilibria where beliefs change enough in order to make it optimal to choose a different action different from their ex-ante optimal action. With standard preferences, that is, both senders and receivers are expected, are payoff maximizers, communication has no effect on outcomes. When the distribution of the two states is uniform, there are informative equilibria, but no persuasive ones. If the state is more likely to be red, they're neither informative nor persuasive equilibria. The receiver's action is the same as if communication didn't exist. So they would be better off choosing red all the time. On the other hand, if the state is more likely to be blue, similarly, there are no informative or persuasive equilibria, and the receiver's optimal action is to choose blue, according to their prior beliefs. If we consider non-standard preferences in the sense that senders are one of 2 types, they are either liars, material payoff maximizers that lie if it's beneficial to do so, or truth tellers that incur a high cost from lying, and that makes them always tell the truth. While receivers are, again, one of two types, either non-sucker averse, that are material payoff maximizers, or sucker averse, that incur a high cost from rewarding a deceitful sender, that is choosing the action red when the message is red and the state is blue. Then communication can have an effect. So, and this depends on the relative conflict of interest. That is determined by the likelihood of the red state. So when the probability of the red state, when the red state is more likely, so P is greater than at least a half, then, and this is a situation where there is relatively less conflict of interest because the ex-ante optimal action of the receiver is the same as the action that the sender wants the receiver to take. And in this case, sucker aversion takes over. This means, what this means is that there is a persuasive equilibrium where sucker averse receivers optimally choose the action blue, which is different than their ex-ante optimal action or the action without communication, which was red. And this has a negative average payoff effect for both the sender and the receiver if there are enough sucker averse receivers in the population. On the other hand, when there is relatively less conflict of interest, more conflict of interest, that is when the probability of the red state is less than a half, so the blue state is more likely, lying aversion takes over. This means that there is a persuasive equilibrium where the receivers optimally choose the action red, which is the action different than their ex-ante optimal action. And this is possible if there are not too many lying senders in the population, so there are enough truth tellers. And this has a positive average effect for both senders and receivers. I test these predictions using an experiment that has a 2x2 between subjects design, where I vary whether messages are present and the level of conflict of interest that is modulated by P, the probability of the state being red. And there are 4 treatments where that differ in whether communication is present or not. So the CM treatments have communication from sender to receiver. The no CM treatments don't have communication. And I also vary the probability of the red state. So I use 2 thresholds, two levels. The 2/3 case, where the red state is 2/3 likely, and this is a situation with a low relative conflict of interest, where the ex-ante optimal action of the receiver is to choose red, and a case where the probability is 1/3. And this is a case where the conflict of interest is high because the optimal ex-ante action of the receiver is to choose the blue state, which is different than what the sender would want the receiver to do. I use free-form one-way communication. It's just a one-shot experiment, so participants play only one round. There are between 58 and 60 observations per role, per treatment. The average duration of the experiment was 20 minutes and average payment £5. This is the communication interface. Participants were randomly assigned to either a seller or a buyer role. The seller had to sell their product and they wanted to sell the red product. The buyer wanted to buy either the red product if the red product was better than the blue product, or the blue product if the blue product was better than the red product. And which product was better was determined by the random draw from this urn that had, depending on the treatment, 2 red balls and 1 blue ball, or 2 blue balls and 1 red ball. So this is the interface for the seller. They see the urn, they see the ball that was drawn. They're also told this means that the blue product is better than the red product. And then they're asked to send a message to the buyer. The prediction, according to standard preferences, is that communication has no effect. Buyers should always buy the red product when when P is 2/3, and when the likelihood of the red state is 2/3. And they should always buy the blue product when P is 1/3. So the likelihood of the red state is 1/3. With lying averse sellers and sucker averse receivers, however, the effect of communication plays a role. In particular, buyers should buy the blue product more often with communication in the 2/3 case, and they should buy the red product more often in the 1/3 case. This would lead to communication decreasing payoffs for both players in the 2/3 case, and increasing payoff for both players in the 1/3 case. Results. First, we'll look at sellers' behavior. So what kind of messages did they send? Recall that I used free-form communication. And so we need to categorize the messages. And luckily, the communication was pretty standard. So there are only 3 types of messages. There are messages that suggest that the state is blue, messages that suggest that the state is red. So this one example for a message that suggests the state is blue ball was drawn, so pick the blue product. One that suggests the state is red, hey, I drew the red ball, the red product is better than the blue. But there are also inconclusive messages that state this product is good quality compared to the other in the art. How are these distributed across states? The inconclusive messages are not very often. In fact, only about 12% of the time they're used. When the state is red, sellers almost always say that the state is red, that the red ball was drawn. When the state is blue, we see that a large majority of people lie, but there's also some truth telling. And in particular, there is a significant, though low proportion of sellers that report the blue state truthfully. So 20% of sellers say that the state is blue. And recall that this is less than 1/2, which was the threshold required for communication to have a positive effect in the 1/3 case. What do receivers do? So these are the frequencies with which receivers choose their ex-ante optimal action across treatments. So in the 2/3 case, their ex-ante optimal action is to buy the red product. In the 1/3 case, this optimal action is to buy the blue product. And what we see is that buyers with communication choose their ex-ante optimal action less often irrespective of 2/3, but this difference, irrespective of P, but this difference is significant only in the 1/3 case. So why might this happen? Focusing on the no communication treatments gives us some intuition about why we observed this a significant effect only in the 1/3 case. So first, we noticed that the behavior of receivers without communication is different than standard theoretical predictions, which suggests that they should always buy, these bars should be at 100%, or at least very close to 100%. So they should always buy the red product in the 2/3 case and always buy the blue product in the 1/3 case. But the difference is much further from this prediction in the 1/3 case. And if we zoom in on what are the implications of the ex-ante optimal action for the sender, we can see that buying the red product, the ex-ante optimal action in the 2/3 case, is a kind action towards the sender, whereas buying the blue product is an unkind action towards the sender in the 1/3 case, which suggests that social preferences play a role in this game, and they might interact with the effect of communication. In particular, communication might enhance the effect of social preferences. So in the 1/3 case, it might lead the receivers to buy the red product more often, whereas in the 2/3 case, it would go in the opposite direction from from skepticism, from what would skepticism predict. In terms of average payoffs, the effect of communication on average payoffs across treatments, I find that communication weakly improves welfare. That is, in the 1/3 case, that is, they increase sellers' payoff without decreasing buyers' payoff, but it has no significant effect in the 2/3 case. So the effect of communication on in the 1/3 case in terms of payoffs does not seem to be driven by sellers' lying aversion, because there are not enough lying averse players in the population of the experiment, but rather by receivers' gullibility. Okay, to conclude, I used a simple theoretical analysis predicting that communication can have both positive and negative effects, and that which direction it takes depends on the relative conflict of interest between the sender and the receiver. The experiment shows that indeed the effect of communication depends on the conflict of interest, but it helps only the seller when interests are more likely conflicting. That was the 1/3 case. And it has no effect when interests are more likely aligned. I do not find evidence for sucker aversion and skepticism, and this is opposite from et al.'s 2014 results. This is actually the main figure from that paper, where they find a pretty large effect between the communication treatment and the no communication treatment. Even though, so there are many similarities between our studies. They also use a buyer-seller setting, and they also use a one-shot scenario and a essentially a cheap talk game, but their game is arguably more complex. They use the Rubinstein 2012 hidden card game, and perhaps the complexity of the environment can interact with how likely these biases are to occur. I also see that buyers' behavior is significantly different than standard equilibrium predictions when communication is absent, and more so when the conflict of interest is high, suggesting that social preferences play a role and they might interact with the effect of communication. And in as next steps, I plan to investigate what are the determinants of skepticism. When should we expect to observe receivers exhibiting skepticism, and when should they not? And how do social preferences interact with strategic communication? And thank you for your attention.
Perfect. Thank you, Valeria. Now we'll have Marta Serra-Garcia from UCSD. She'll discuss this paper.
Okay, so I think now I'm good. Yeah, so I'm gonna just give you a few thoughts summarizing the paper, and then highlighting things that you could think about for the future. So just as a wrap up, I think that you're asking a very interesting question: does communication harm or help? You're adding both theory and experiments, and it's a very nice combination of both things. In general, I think the paper does a great job at bringing an interesting question with two contributions on the theory and the empirical side. As a matter of background, I think the big picture is that for now, or for years, economists have been discussing what does communication do to economic decisions, and we don't have a good handle in terms of a theory that will be very predictive and give precise predictions as to what will people say, how will people believe it, and what will it do to behavior. And some of what you're talking about is also reminiscent of Ullmann's conjecture that we think it should help, but maybe it doesn't. And there's been a discussion both in the theory literature that you could relate to make this even a bigger question. Behaviorally, we've seen lots of evidence in the last 10 to 15 years showing that senders often exhibit preferences for truth-telling, not always. And, you know, we have Johannes Abeller's meta-analysis that gives us a really great overview of the literature. There's less focus on receivers, and I think that's where, you know, a lot of recent work is, I think, increasingly turning to. And your work is bringing, I think, a new perspective here in the sense that it's saying, well, receivers may not have standard preferences, and they may exhibit sucker aversion, right? So they dislike being lied to, and so that means that if I anticipate you may be lying to me, I may be increasingly skeptical because I don't want to be the dupe that believed you where you were lying to me. That has a connection to a related literature that has taken a different behavioral assumption that has actually assumed basically the opposite, right? It's said, well, people are exceedingly gullible. They believe things too much. There's, you know, an early theoretical paper showing the effects of gullibility in sender-receiver games in the Crawford-Sobel framework, but there's also increasing evidence on, you know, level K and non-sophisticated receivers and what that does, right? And I think your paper gives a different perspective, and you could connect those two more closely and say, look, we need to understand receivers. The determinants of skepticism would actually kind of go in that direction, right? When are we too gullible? When are we too skeptical? So I think this is a great open question, and we could understand more, and your theory and your evidence gives us some first very interesting hints. I really like the game. I think it's very simple. It's very difficult to find an experiment that is simple and clean, and you've done that, right? It's a very simple payoff game. There's a 2x2 design. There's either a P of 2/3 or a P of 1/3 that the state is red. And, you know, you have very clear predictions given your non-standard assumptions. So I think the design is really clean, and it's very nice that you came up with a game that kind of brings it all together. In terms of the results, I think you already said this, right? So when you look at the setting without communication, there seem to be some deviations from equilibria, especially indicative of social preferences. I think in some case, you know, it just may be noise, right? So the ex-ante optimal option is red, and 86% of people take red. Well, maybe the 13% that's missing, it's just, you know, people who are noisy. And that also kind of is something to take into account. But the social preference part, I think, is important because you could develop your paper more to think about the interaction between social preferences and communication, given that there's some psych literature and potentially some evidence in econ also that, you know, communication enhances your connection to the other person. So you may care more about the other person. There is more vagueness in one of your treatments. I call vagueness the question mark messages. They're neither saying red or blue, but they're saying something. And I think you could explore that a little bit better. Unluckily, perhaps in your setting, there's not that much skepticism, which is probably not what you were looking for. And so the question is, what can you do now, right? Like, you have an interesting hypothesis, but not much evidence for it. I guess my suggestions would be to look into more the content of the messages. So it's really nice that the communication is free-form. You could do more content analysis with type of messages. They may not just be red or blue, but they may be richer, and some may be more persuasive than others. Some may appeal to social preferences, I don't know, but there may be more to do with that. And so I think that brings me to my broader, you know, you have a focus on does communication harm or help, but there are more things that we could learn from the paper. And so perhaps thinking of other broader lessons could make it less salient that, well, yeah, in the experiment, we don't see a huge effect, right? There's no harm and there's a small help. So yeah, I think potentially going forward, a venue that could be interesting and we haven't explored as much is this interaction between these pro-social preferences and communication. And it's complex, as you already say in your paper, but there may be more to do there. So congratulations, and I'm looking forward to more. And I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you, Marta. We have 1 minute if you would like to respond, or if there are any questions from the audience, they can also raise their hand. Valeria?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the comments. I very much agree with everything you said, and yeah, many have highlighted a lot of things that I've been thinking about already, but haven't yet put them into practice. The idea of the effect that messages have, or the level of conflict has on whether messages are more or less vague, I think is interesting. Unfortunately, with the experiment that I have, there's very little vagueness to begin with. So I don't think that I can do much with it, but I think there's scope for looking further into this in perhaps a different setting, of more trying to collect more data on this. I also think that what is missing from the senders, on the one hand, that there's little research indeed, as you point out, on the receiver side in these sender-receiver interactions, but also on the sender side, we have a lot of evidence about lying aversion in the standard die-rolling task or individual decision-making task, but not so much in the strategic settings. And I think that I think 20% is a bit of on the low side of truth-telling. Typically, the data, I think the average in the Abelair paper is about 16% of lying. So it's exactly flipped, which suggests that perhaps there is scope to look into how the strategic concerns also affect lying aversion. But yeah, thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you so much, Valeria.
I'm happy to take any other questions if there are.
Wonderful. So we're actually at 10:31 right now. So just for the sake of time, we'll actually move on to our next speaker for today. But if you have any other questions for Valeria, or if we'd like to return to discussion of this paper, feel free to stay for the after party once we finish with the second talk for today. So I have the pleasure of announcing our next speaker for today, who is Lian Xue. We'll be presenting her paper on lie aversion, anonymity, and social distance. Are people more willing to lie using a mobile phone? Lian is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Economics at the School of Economics and Management at Wuhan University, and received her PhD in 2017 from the University of East Anglia. So Lian, if you are ready, feel free to take it away.
Okay, thank you for the nice introduction. And now I will share my screen. Okay, is it fine? I will start the timer. Okay, cool. Okay, thanks for the opportunity for me to present here. And the topic I'm talking about today is lie aversion, anonymity, and social distance. Are people more willing to lie using a mobile phone? This is a joint project with Edward Cartwright, who is now in the Montfort University. The outline of this talk: first, I will talk about the introduction, the experimental design, hypothesis, results, and conclusion. Also, we all know that there is a strong evidence that most individuals have a predisposition to be relatively honest. And the leading explanation for this is that honesty creates ethical dissonance between an individual's behavior and moral values. Hence, there is intrinsic value from truth-telling to maintain positive self-concept. However, there are various cognitive mechanisms or tricks can be used to lie and still maintain positive self-concepts. For example, Irratan Gnizzi distinguished between white lie and black lie, where dishonesty is benefiting or harmful to another. And this suggests that different environments or frames could lead to increased dishonesty. So in this paper, we consider whether people are more likely to lie using mobile phones, desktop computer, or pen and paper. In motivating our work, we begin by highlighting that the world is clearly fastly evolving from pen and paper towards online interactions, including our financial activities such as signing checks and contracts are being replaced by online banking, digital contracts, and email confirmation. It is important, therefore, to explore whether online interactions has an impact on willingness to lie. Well, our current project is related with two strands of literature. First is the economic studies examining lying aversion and the communication medium. For instance, Cohn et al. 2018, they have shown that people are more willing to lie when they interact with a machine rather than a person. And there are various other studies show that willingness to lie will be dependent on the communication channels. And second is the online disinhibition effects in the psychology literature. there are a group of studies who have examined the effects of different communication medium from face-to-face and then paper to online on uninhibited behaviors, such as usage of negative language and impression management, and they found a positive correlation. So if dishonesty is indeed more prevalent in an online world, then this would have fundamental implications for the trust and cooperation in our society. So to explore the impact of online interactions on dishonesty, we designed an experiment to compare dishonesty in 3 communication media: pen and paper, desktop computer, and mobile phone. We also compare across 2 payout mechanisms, one where dishonesty harms another, that is a zero-sum structure, and the second where it benefits another, that is a mutual gain structure. And in this project, we introduced a simple extension to the standard coin flipping task that allow us to study dishonesty in a setting where the payoff of 2 players are interdependent between each other. And a particular feature of this design that it allows us also to explore the connection between dishonesty and the social preference. So to sum up our finding, we find that dishonesty is significantly higher when using mobile phones than pen and paper in both payout structures. So to answer the questions in our title, yes, we do find people are more likely to lie using mobile phones. And second, we found that dishonesty in desktop computer treatments is relatively high in mutual gain and low in zero sum. That is, dishonesty with desktop computers is mediated by whether the lie is beneficial or harmful to another. And we suggest that these results can be explained by looking at the perceived social distance between the 2 players and the anonymity of the decision. And finally, in consistency with previous literature, there are more dishonesty in the zero sum than the mutual gain structure. So here is our experimental design. We used the 2x3 factorial between subjects experimental design, and the 2 treatment variables were payoff structure and the communication media, as we can see here. So the experiment conditions were kept as similar across protocols as possible. Specifications, no matter they are desktop, computer, or pen, they were conducted in the same physical lab in Wuhan University. The desktop and phone protocols were run using O-tree. With desktop treatments, they were implementing using a web browser in the laboratory desktop, and for phone treatment, participants performed the game using their own phones by scanning the QR code provided by the experimenter on a project screen. In all treatment, subjects were asked to perform 2 tasks in sequence, a guesser task and a marker task. In the guesser's task, the participants were asked to guess the outcome of 10 coin guesses. And then after they complete the guess sheet, this guess sheet will be passed to another participant. And then this other participant will perform the marker task, where they toss a coin 10 times and record whether each guess from the guesser were correct or not. And the payoffs of the 2 players are determined by markers record about how many marks were correct. So crucially, there's no external validation of markers record, and this provides opportunity for the marker to be dishonest. And at the end of the experiment, participants were paid based on one of the tasks with legitimate pairing. And here is an example of the guess sheet in the experiment. First, the guesser guesses the outcome of 10 coin guesses, and then the markers record whether they are correct or not. And for our 2 payoff structure, for the zero-sum payoff structure, for each correct guess, the guesser receives a positive amount, and the marker receives 0. And the marker can lie and report the guess as incorrect. Then the marker can receive positive amount, and the guesser receives 0. So in this case, dishonesty comes at the direct cost of the guesser. In the terminology of Eret and Gnisi, this is a selfish black line. And in the other treatment, in mutual gain treatment, the payoff were changed so that each correct guess results positive payoff for both the marker and the guesser. So this is a Pareto white lie if the marker report a higher number of incorrect guesses than actually observed. In our experiment, we set the payoff for each correct guess, that is denoted B, as 2 Chinese yuan. So, and our average payoff is around 28. So for the research hypothesis, in their review of literature, Abler et al. Distinguished the 3 basic explanations for lie aversion, that is lying cost, social conformity, and reputation for honesty. In our context, given the payoff interdependence between the two players, we also introduce the influence of social preference. So to capture the lying cost, we introduce a very simple parameterized model. Utility is a function of R, W, and G. W is the actual monetary payoff from marker's coin tosses, and R is his reported payoff, and G is the payoff of the guesser. The utility function of the marker can be written as the realized payoff minus the lying cost, which is further distinguished into three parts. First is the internalized cost of lying that is measured by the distance between the reported payoff and the actual payoff. It is also related with social conformity, where the individual experiences lower cost of lying if she expects others will also do so. So alpha is a decreasing function with first order beliefs on the likely report of others. So the second term is the reputation cost from dishonesty. An individual feels a stronger aversion to lying if she expects this will influence others' belief of her reputation of honest. And it is measured by beta, and it is increasing with the distance between the reported payoff and the expected payoff, which is 5b. And the final term is the social preference cost, which is through the form of the altruism. Markers will always prefer guesser receive a higher payoff, and it is captured by gamma times guesser's payoff. And building on this equation, we could solve for the optimal report of the marker as a function of W. We suggest we now turn our attention to the possible treatment effects, especially among the three communication media. And here we mainly explore the role of social distance and anonymity. We suggest that social distance primarily impact on social preference. That is, the closer the social distance, the more weight the marker will put on guesser's payoff. So gamma is an increasing function of the closeness between marker and guesser. And among our three communication media, we argue that paper has the closest social distance and phone has the furthest social distance. Because in pen and paper treatment, the marker and the guesser are actually physically written on the same piece of paper. And in phone protocol, everyone is using their own phones, so they have nothing in common except that being in the same experiment. And desktop treatment is in the middle in terms of social distance. And next, we look at anonymity. Anonymity primarily impact on the reputation cost of dishonesty. Previous literature has found that reporting in a coin tossing task is increasing in the anonymity of the communication between subject and experimenter. So therefore, beta is decreasing function with anonymity. We argue that among the three communication media, phone is least. A phone is perceived the most anonymous, and the paper is perceived the least anonymous among the three communication media. And these two predictions motivates our hypothesis about the communication media. So building on the model, in total we have three hypotheses. Hypothesis one looks at the payoff structure. It mainly comes from the social preference cost, also from the self-serving hypothesis. That is, it is easier to justify lying when it is a white lie than it is a black lie. And hypothesis 2 and 3 looks at the communication media. Hypothesis 2 comes from the social distance through the social preference cost. Recall that paper has the closest social distance and the phone has the furthest social distance. So we predict that in the zero-sum payoff structure, where lying is at the cost of another person, the reported payoff will be highest in phone and lowest in paper. Whereas in the mutual gain, where lying is beneficial for another, so reported payoff will be highest in paper and lowest in phone. Then our hypothesis 3 look at anonymity, comes from anonymity through the influence on the reputation costs. Because phone has the highest anonymity and paper has the least, therefore we predict that reported payoff will be highest in phone and lowest in paper. Okay, now we move on to our results. First, we have a look at the effect of payoff structure. And our effect of payoff structure basically confirms with hypothesis 1. That is, we find more dishonesty in zero-sum than mutual gain. However, this effect is mainly driven by the desktop treatments. And in this figure, we plot the histogram of the frequency of the own benefit marks from 0 to 10 across all treatments, we can see that, and the yellow shaded part is a truthful binomial distribution. We can see in all conditions, there is a significant screwiness to the right, indicating the existence of lying. And when we look into detail, the screwiness to the right is noticeable higher in the mutual gain, which is a white bar, than the zero sum, the gray bar, in desktop treatment. But there is no significant difference for the phone and the paper treatment. Okay, this result is also confirmed with the average reported frequency of own benefit marks, as we can see in this table. So at an aggregate level, participants are more likely to report a high reported payoff in mutual gain than zero sum. However, this is mainly driven by the desktop treatment. And for phone and paper, there's no significant difference across the payoff structures. So now we move on to the results about communication media. First, we compare the paper and phone treatments. This result is fitting our hypothesis 3, the anonymity treatment. That is because there's a higher anonymous in paper than phone, so we observe that reported payoff are higher in phone than paper in both the mutual gain and zero sum settings. And next, we compare the desktop and paper treatment. We find that the reported payoff is higher with desktop than paper in the mutual gain. However, there's no significant difference in the zero sum settings. And at an aggregate level, this result also fits our hypothesis 3, the anonymity hypothesis, because there's higher anonymous in paper, so people become less dishonesty. And then finally, we compare between phone and desktop treatments, which is the least obvious among all comparisons. We find that reported payoffs are higher in desktop than phone in the mutual gain, and higher in phone than desktop in the zero sum. These results, however, fit our hypothesis 2, that is the social distance hypothesis, because there is closer social distance in desktop treatment than in phone treatment, so participants are more likely to lie if it benefits another, and less likely to lie if it is harmful to another in desktop than in phone. However, these results only marginally significant at 10% significant level, so it's inconclusive. And this figure plots all the average reported payoff across payoff structure and communication media. In sum, paper treatment is perceived as the most anonymous, which results the lowest reported payoff among all communication media. And the comparison between phone treatments and paper and desktop and paper basically fits our hypothesis 2, the anonymous hypothesis. And those tests were significant at least 5% level in both non-parametric test and the regression analysis. And the results of desktop and the phone is marginally significant and fit our hypothesis 3, the social distance hypothesis. So in order to gain some additional insights, we fit our theoretical model to the experimental data. Specifically, we fixed alpha at 0.15, which is the best fit for all 3 communication media. And we search for the best fitted value for beta and gamma. One standout feature is a flipping between paper and desktop treatments in terms of the relative importance of reputation, beta, and social preference, gamma. So reputation concern, which is captured by beta, and it is connected with anonymity, were foremost in the paper treatment. And the social preference, which is related with social distance, also captured by gamma, were the foremost in desktop treatment from the prediction. And finally, we did some ex-post analysis of heterogeneity among socio-economic characteristics. In total, we find no gender effect. Both genders are more likely to lie in zero sum than mutual gain. However, we do find that the effect of payoff structure is more pronounced within experienced subjects, that is, participants with more than 5 prior laboratory experiments. And also, we compared between single and non-single child. Almost all our subjects were born under the one-child policy in China, so it provides a good subject pool to compare between the two types. And we found that non-single child are more likely to lie for the benefit of others. And finally, based on Bartling et al.'s social preference related questions, we classify our subjects into egalitarian and non-egalitarian. And the subjects who are non-egalitarian are more likely to lie if it benefits another. So in conclusion, in this paper, we explored whether people are more likely to lie if it benefits than harmful to another, and the influence of communication media on dishonesty. We propose a simple theoretical model that mainly focused on the influence of communication media on social preference and anonymity, social distance and anonymity. Based on this model, we have the hypothesis that phone has the largest social distance and highest anonymity, and we find that individuals focus on their own payoffs in phone treatments with consistently high level of dishonesty in both zero-sum and mutual gain structure. And then paper treatments have the smallest social distance and lowest anonymity. Our results are in part fit the hypothesis that individuals put more weight on their own reputation because of the low anonymity. However, not in the social preference, which results the lowest level of dishonesty across both payoff structures. And in desktop treatment, both social distance and anonymity are at the intermediate level, and our result indicating that participants switched their focus on other people. That is, other regarding preference becomes the most salient in the desktop treatment. So in sum, we find that in phone and paper treatments, participants have a focus on themselves, either on their own reputation or on their own payoff or their own reputation. Whereas in desktop treatment, other regarding preference becomes foremost. Participants are more likely to lie for the benefit of another person. And the application of our work is that we show that different types of digital communication could lead to different levels of dishonesty, and also the importance of the mediating effect of payoff structure. And these findings can be applied in the field of tax evasion and financial fraud, for example. And finally, our findings also have implications for how experiments are conducted. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lian. We'll now turn to Agne Kajackaite for discussion.
Okay, sure.
Okay, I will start. I think. Where is it? Okay, share screen. This is this. Can you all see it? Perfect. Hi, thanks for the nice presentation. Hi from Berlin. So I prepared a couple of slides and I will go through them pretty quickly and then maybe we can discuss because I have some questions. So in the summary, as now presented in a nice way, the research question was whether people lie differently when they use different devices. So whether they lie differently when they use a computer, a smartphone, and pen and paper. This is the main question. The second question is, do people lie differently in different payoff structures? So is lying different in a zero-sum game and a mutual gain game, again, using those different media? And what the authors find is that there's altogether more lying with a smartphone than using pen and paper in both games. In the zero-sum game and mutual game, which is likely due to the perceived social distance. And I will tell you in a bit why I think that the result is driven by the social distance. And then the other result comes with the desktop treatment, which is for me not really clear, and I would like to discuss that. So we see that lying is high in the mutual game, but low in the zero-sum game in this treatment. And the question is why? And I don't think that the paper gives the answer yet, but so that's why we are here to discuss and to see. So why do I think that the social distance would actually lead to the highest lying in smartphones, second highest lying in desktop treatment, and third, the highest in smartphones, second desktop, and then pen and paper? Well, because I think it goes hand in hand with anonymity. So in both cases, the rule is to tell the truth. So it's not a dictator game. It's not a location game. It's a truth-telling game. The rule is to tell the truth, and it doesn't matter whether it's a mutual gain game or a zero-sum game. So both lying for the mutual benefit and O benefit is against this rule. So if you lie for the other person and yourself, you are against the rule. Therefore, lying should harm one's social image in both games. And this should be the main thing. This should be like the main thing that people would care about. And therefore, I think that the gamma that you had, this parameter, like the social distance, how far you are from the person, actually should go next to the social image. So actually, if I'm far away from you, I don't care that much that you will perceive me as a liar because I'm far away from you, you know, hiding behind my smartphone. Then I'm in front of the desktop, I cannot hide that much from you, and then, you know, it's pen and paper. So I think actually this is what is happening in the game, and that's why I think it makes sense what you find in the smartphone and pen and paper treatments, so that you see the highest lying in the smartphone treatment in both games, in the zero-sum game and the mutual game. Now, yeah, and this is what I wrote down. So I think that due to the social image component, due to you wanting to appear honest and different degrees of this willingness, you know, in different games, I think that lying should be the highest in the paper game, then desktop, is lowest in the paper game, then desktop and smartphone in all games. So in the zero-sum game and in the mutual game. And this is what you see in the paper game and smartphone game, but you don't see it in the desktop game. And this desktop game is really like a mystery for me, and I don't think I can answer the question. I'm not sure you are doing this in the paper yet. And what I was looking at then, I was like, okay, why is the result like this? Like, again, like I'm showing the slide with the results. It's really weird what's happening here, right? So what's happening in the desktop, why you have this lying here so high in the mutual game, I don't think it's explainable with any of your, you know, hypothesis, theories, anything you have in the paper. So this is really, you know, weird. Like the zero-sum game result is not so weird. Like this just doesn't make much sense. And then I was trying to make sense of it. I couldn't make sense out of it. And then I went back to the experimental procedure and so on. And what I noticed is the following. So you actually have, I mean, it's a very cheap way to go, but you have very low subject pool. So you have like, I mean, it's a random draw game. You have max 40 observation a cell. It's just, you know, everything could be happening there. I think that you're way underpowered, and also the effect sizes are not so high here, you know. So I think what your problem is, and I think why you have a problem now to explain everything ex post, is that just for a random draw cheating game, it's a way too low sample, and I think you should increase the sample size, and I think that then maybe those mysteries would go away. But I mean, I'm happy to discuss. That's actually all I have. Yeah.
Okay.
So
thank you very much. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for the comments, and I much agree with you about the results we found in desktop treatment, especially in mutual game. And according to our hypothesis, also, I think you mentioned about the social image. I think what we have that's similar to social image is anonymous. So basically, if people have closer, it have higher anonymous, then people will be more concerned with their own social image. Also, based on our anonymous prediction, because phone is perceived most anonymous, so people should have the highest lie dishonesty in phone. However, we observe people have highest in desktop in the mutual game, and we try to explain this in the conclusion. We say that it might be because in phone and paper, individuals have focused on themselves. In phone, it is because it is most anonymous, so they're concerned about their own payoff. And in paper, it's least anonymous, so they're concerned about their self-image. And in desktop, their concern is shifted from themselves to the other people, so other regarding preference. So although it's not an allocation game, but at this time they might want participants from the same laboratory to get more money. That is in the mutual game. They want to lie for their partners in the laboratory. However, these are not consistent also with our hypothesis. And yes, I agree with you. Maybe we need more explanation for this result.
Yeah, like it's very, very puzzling, the desktop result.
Yeah.
Even if you're going with your other story, like I'm going for the social image, you're going for the more value of placing on like a location thing. Even if you go that way, just the desktop doesn't make much sense, you know. And I think this will be problematic also to sell with publication and so on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And also, what do you think about the sample size? I mean, did you do like any power calculations beforehand? Don't you think it's a bit too low for a random draw game?
Well, we think the sample because although we did this experiment last year, so even now we want to increase the sample size, it becomes impossible, and so it is a problem. But as I think the although the effect size is not so large, but the tests are quite significant, especially for the desktop treatment. It's significant. It's 1% significant level. So I think at least the results in desktop treatment is quite robust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think that
I guess we're now in the after party. So thanks to all the speakers and discussants. And so for people in the audience, if you raise your hand, if you have questions, please raise your hand. So in the participant button, there's a raising hand button, and then we can let you ask your question, or you can use the Q&A function. All right, since I'm not muted, I'm going to take advantage of this and ask a couple of questions. So Lian, in your treatment, so it is interesting that the first part is, you know, you said that the phone is the most anonymous. I mean, it is intriguing, right? The phone is more anonymous than the desktop, which is more anonymous than the paper and pencil. Is this validated? If I think about it, the phone is the most personalized item, right? So everyone personalized their phone, whereas the desktop, I assume, is in the lab. Excuse me. And they're identical, right? They're uniform across, belongs to the university. So I'm wondering, maybe there are extensive psychological evidence that the phone is the most anonymous device. Do you have, or is there a way to validate it?
We haven't found any literature saying that phone is anonymous. Just it's based on our prediction. We think that people are worried about other people will see their choice. So there's a paper about the screen size. So the larger the screen size, the people perceive their decisions are less anonymous. So we think maybe because phone normally has smaller screen size and they put in their hand, so maybe they are less worried about other people see their decisions than desktop. But also it is true that in phone we can know which phone people are using from the O3 server. But I think subjects participant didn't consider about that aspect in the experiment.
I think it would be nice to have some empirical evidence to validate the. It's a speculation, right? It's a conjecture that you think the phone is the most anonymous, and so is it because, you know, the papers are passed to the experimenter, the desktops belong to the lab, and the phone is your own thing, so the experimenter cannot take it. Is that why? That the anonymity is truly anonymous. You know, for the die throwing game, it is truly anonymous using your phone. I don't know. I mean, it's an open question.
Yeah, I think if we can validate this conjecture, it will be best. But I'm not sure how do we make this a valid point.
You can use a survey. You can email the participant or use a different sample. Use a different sample of students and ask them, you know, ask them to guess. I was thinking of using the the Krupke-Weber's coordination game, but it's a third party guessing, incentivized guessing of what the experimental outcome is, right? And it's not very expensive to run those. You can run it online, definitely.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
To predict, you know, if you ask the third party to predict what was the modal outcome, what was socially appropriate for various types of behavior, and they match if their answer coincide with most of their cohort, that would make the results, I think, less arbitrary. Right now, you know, the experimenters' conjecture here are the 3 modes of communication, and it's not clear. I think we're still accumulating evidence. I think the Kohn et al. Study is a phone, right? They use the phone. You either talk with a person or talk with a computer. So we don't really have, I'm not aware of these comparisons. It's a very interesting question, but I think it's an empirical question regarding which one is most anonymous, which medium of communication is most anonymous. And I think from a methodological perspective, it's also interesting to know, because we are going to move a lot of our experiments to mobile phones probably.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if we have a way to measure that, it will be great. Yeah, thank you.
There's this nice paper you're citing by Conrads and Lotz. You're citing it in your paper about the different communication channels and lying. I think you should discuss it more in the paper, because they also they have isolated lab cells, and sometimes they call by the phone, sometimes they bring the paper to one to the other. So the paper is exactly on communication channels and lying. And you cite it in one sentence, but you don't really compare your results to them.
Okay, okay, I will have.
Conrads and Lotz, you cite the paper.
Oh, yeah, I know that paper, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a look through, yeah.
I wanted to, I know that there's a question for me, but I also wanted to add something for Lian related to the possibility of this weird desktop effect, which might be that perhaps how much people are used to a particular medium of communication also plays a role for a particular task. So if you're doing your tax returns, or I don't know, more often on the computer than on your phone, then maybe you're more used to lying on the computer than on your phone, or depending on how often you do certain tasks on a different medium of communication, that might also be determining your likelihood of lying.
I think at least the experiment subjects should be more familiar with the desktop desktop experiment than the phone experiment. So maybe also because we find that the treatment, the payoff structure difference is mainly driven by the experienced subjects. So maybe it's because they are more familiar with the desktops than the smartphones. Yeah, we could consider about that. Yeah, thank you.
Should I ask? Should Boon ask the question, or?
Yeah, maybe I'll just sort of rephrase what I type. I mean, lying, I guess, what you're considering here is by commission, right? So the sender basically sends red when the actual state is blue. But what was actually nice about your design is you have freeform text, so you could actually, you have a category of no information, and I guess no information could to some extent be interpreted as some form of avoidance, or actually lying by omission if you want to be more extreme. And you seem to also have more of that category in the treatment where there is a high conflict of interest. So I just thought that was interesting. So it's more like a comment than a question itself.
Yeah, I definitely think that lying by omission and how people choose to lie in different, what type of lies people choose depending on the conflict of interest is an interesting question in itself. And there is some evidence. I actually have another work in progress that's going to be a working paper soon that is about evasive communication and the fact that people seem to have a lower cost of lying from sending no information, which is still a lie in itself compared to a direct lie, so the lying by commission. And this is a paper with Despinal and Paki and Daniel Vid. We didn't investigate whether the distribution of these lies depends on the alignment of interest between the two parties, but it might be something interesting to look into next, comparing the slight evidence that I have in this experiment that people might be more incentivized to lie by omission when there's more conflict of interest. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
I actually have a question for Agne for one of your comments, which is about lying should harm one's social image in both games. So I'm wondering, given the anonymity of the dice throwing game, is it self-image or social image? It seems to me that it should be self-image, right? So I have some ideal, or my parents inculcated in me since I was a child, that you should not be lying. And so I have this ideal in my utility function, and I lied. And so that should harm my self-image. But nobody actually see me or my individual action, or that's the presumption, right? So shouldn't that be self-image or social image? I'm just, it's a true question.
Yeah, so both are playing a role, right? So self-image plays a role in both, but I'm talking about social image too. It's another like variable in the function, which also Lian has in her function, because she has like the self-image and social image and the social preference and the monetary gain. So the social image is that I don't want to appear as a dishonest person in front of the other person. So I want to appear honest. And we show it with Uri and Joel in our paper, where we look at non-observed and observed games. So basically we differentiate between a game where the experimenter knows that I lie, so he observes my random outcome, or he doesn't know whether I lie. And what we see when the game is non-observed and the experimenter doesn't know our real outcome, we try to appear honest in the sense that we, for example, report the second highest outcome, because the second highest outcome looks more like a true than the highest outcome. So what basically we showed in that paper, and what other people also showed, also Abel showed it in their paper, is that people care not only about feeling good about themselves, like church told me don't lie, so I don't lie, but also I care about what about this experimenter or this stranger in this game will think about me, whether he will think I'm a liar or not. And again, like talking about media, about the different devices that Lian is using, in the smartphone, I'm so far away, you know, with my phone that my report is not really, you know, seen as much as independent paper. So that's why my social image is less, it can be less affected by my lie than independent paper. So it's an additional thing to self-image. It's an additional thing in the utility function. Because of course we care about ourselves, and we care how good we feel when we tell a lie, but we also care whether other people now think of us as liars.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that really points to the fact that, you know, even though we tell them that, you know, no one knows your realization of your die, they might not trust the experimenter. They might think, wow, they tell us that, but maybe they will track your IP address of the computer and figure out, yeah.
Perhaps an interesting way to test the intensity of this effect would be to actually do the version of your experiment, Agne, but on a phone or a desktop, and see whether anonymity plays a less of a role when you do this task on the phone. And that would also be like supporting the social image difference between the three
Yeah, that would be a nice addition. It would be nice to increase her sample size and then run these treatments, but unfortunately it is impossible right now, especially I guess in where she is.
I think we have a, oh, we've answered this question, but okay. Okay, so Catherine says thank you to all the panelists. So one question about this die throwing game, this protocol now, it seems that it's like a measurement, right? We use it almost like a survey now. So I'm thinking about how the Holt and Laurie protocol evolved over time. And right now it's just as common to embed it at the end of the survey because it's easy to run. And so Valeria, for your example, for your experiment, for example, would you think, I mean, this is speculation, that if you run the die roll game at the end as a measurement of individual honesty, would you think that that would be highly correlated with what you observe in the experiment, in the strategic communication experiment?
That's an interesting question. I am not sure. I think that the results could go in the direction that there would be high correlation, and we would observe that the fact that they lied in the first case because of consistency concerns, or because now they got used to lying, they're gonna lie in the die rolling task as well, which is somewhat in line. I think that if you do the die rolling task repeatedly, lying tends to increase. I'm not entirely sure if this experiment was done, but I have some vague recollection that it might be the case when you repeat this task, then lying should increase. But it also, like, given that if there is no so if the task is a good task, then we should expect no correlation. We should expect that the lying likelihood would still be somewhere around 18%, 16, 20%, relatively low. So there should be a lot of truth telling. And that would be a good test for how good of a measurement this is for intrinsic lying costs, if intrinsic lying costs are constant. If there is high correlation, then yeah, that's an interesting result in itself as well, that intrinsic lying costs are affected by previous tasks and experience.
I think, just to add to that, I think there's also this, what you said, in games, there seems to be a lower lying cost, right? So different rules apply, right? I'm playing a game against someone else, then the norm of I should tell the truth may be less what's important, rather than, you know, we're playing a game. Like, I'm playing poker. It's okay to lie in poker, right? I think other people have used this analogy. And so you may find, for some people it does correlate, right? But for others, they may see, or self-serving, may see these games as having very different.
Yeah, I think that another important aspect would be how likely the task is to bring in the lab or in the experimental setting the lying norms that people have in their real life. So a game setting is more likely to abstract from these norms, which is why perhaps we see more lying. Whereas this simple die rolling task is more likely to help, well, to lead people to use their normal life norms, to apply their day-to-day life norms to their responses. Yeah, in principle, I think it is a good task for measuring lying norms, but it would be interesting to find a systematic way of testing its validity.
Okay. All right. Any questions from the audience? Any additional questions from the audience? Or the panelists? All right, so thank you very much. Thanks to all the participants, the speakers, and the discussants for an excellent session. And we'll see you in a week.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing for the comments.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.